Saladin was born in 1137 or 1138 in the city of Tikrit in present-day Iraq. His personal name was Yusuf. Salah ad-Din is a nickname, an honorific epithet, meaning righteousness of the faith. His family was of Kurdish ancestry, and had originated from the village of Ajdarnakan near the city of Dv in central Armenia. His father, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, the Rawadiya tribe he hailed from, had been partially assimilated into the Arabic-speaking world by this time. In 1132, the defeated army of Zangi, Atabeg of Mosul, found their retreat blocked by the Tigris River opposite the fortress of Tikrit, where Saladin's father, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, served as the warden. In 1137, Mujahid ad-Din Beruz, who had been appointed military governor of northern Mesopotamia for his service to the Seljuks, ordered Najm ad-Din Ayyub and his brother Asad ad-Din Shirkuh to be exiled from Tikrit because Shirkuh had killed one of the citadel's commanders for the sake of a woman whose honor he had dishonored. Shirkuh avenged her honor when she pleaded with him for help and killed him. Saladin was born on the same night that his family left Tikrit. In 1139, Ayyub and his family moved to Mosul, and Ahmad ad-Din Zengi appointed Najm ad-Din Ayyub as commander of his castle at Baalbek. After his death in 1146, his son Nur ad-Din Zengi became regent of Aleppo and leader of the Zengid dynasty. Saladin's early education focused on religious studies. He studied the Quran, Hadith, and Islamic jurisprudence, following the Shafi school of thought. He also received instruction in Arabic, essential for understanding Islamic texts, as well as literature and poetry. These studies contributed to his balanced character and provided a strong moral foundation reflected in his just leadership. In addition to his religious education, Saladin received military training, a natural outcome of his familial environment. Saladin learned horsemanship, weapon handling, and combat techniques crucial for survival and success in his era. He gained practical experience by accompanying his uncle Shirkuh on military campaigns. Political education also played a crucial role in Saladin's upbringing. Living under the guidance of Nur al-Din Zengi, a respected Muslim leader, Saladin observed principles of justice, dedication to Islamic unity, and effective statecraft. This close association allowed him to learn leadership skills, military strategy, and governance, preparing him for future roles of authority. In the mid-12th century, Egypt was engulfed in deep political and religious conflict due to the weakening of the Fatimid Caliphate, a Shiite Ismaili dynasty that had ruled the country for centuries. The divide between Sunni and Shia was not merely theological, it extended into politics and alliances. Tensions between the Fatimids and Sunni powers in the Levant and Iraq grew, especially with the rise of leaders like Nur al-Din Zengi, who aimed to unify the Islamic world under Sunni leadership to counter the Crusader threat. At this time, Egypt faced severe internal crises fueled by rivalries among competing ministers vying for power. The position of vizier, chief minister, had become the true source of authority, as the Fatimid caliphs had largely lost political influence. Amid this power struggle, two contenders, Shawar and Durjam, clashed over the Vizierate. Durjam succeeded in ousting Shawar, who fled to Nur al-Din in search of support to reclaim his position. Nur al-Din saw an opportunity to extend Sunni influence into Egypt and weaken the Fatimid regime. He dispatched a military campaign led by Asad al-Din Shirkuh and his young nephew, Salah al-Din, with the mission of restoring Shawar to power and solidifying Zengid influence in the region. During this time, the Crusaders, emboldened by the outcomes of the First Crusade, sought to exploit the Sunni-Shia divide to their advantage, viewing the turmoil in Egypt as a chance to expand their control. Egypt became a focal point for regional and religious power struggles. The Fatimid dynasty, weakened by internal dissent and external threats, found itself caught between Sunni forces from the Zengid state and Crusader ambitions. When Shirkuh's forces successfully reinstated Shawar, the situation remained tense, as the Fatimid court resented Zengid interference, and Shawar himself was wary of Shirkuh's ambitions. The Crusaders, meanwhile, attempted to intervene in Egypt, recognizing its strategic and economic importance. Nur al-Din, aware of the danger posed by Crusader expansion, made Egypt a central part of his strategy to unify Muslim forces and repel external threats. This convergence of religious, political, and military dynamics created a volatile environment, setting the stage for Salah al-Din's rise as a key figure in unifying Sunni Muslims, dismantling the Fatimid Caliphate, and ultimately returning Egypt to Sunni Islam. Shawar's agreement with Nur ad-Din Zangi was a strategic pact aimed at regaining Shawar's position as vizier of Egypt, which he had lost to his rival, Durjam. In exchange for military assistance from Nur ad-Din, Shawar promised to pay a substantial sum of 50,000 dinars once he was reinstated as vizier. This hefty amount underscored the economic and strategic significance of Egypt at the time, as well as Shawar's desperation to secure his position. Beyond the monetary compensation, the agreement implied a political alliance, with Shawar expected to remain loyal to Nur ad-Din. This would have given Nur ad-Din leverage in Egypt, then under the rule of the Fatimid Caliphate, a Shiite power, while Nur ad-Din championed Sunni Islam in the region. However, after Shawar regained his position, he reneged on the agreement and turned against Nur ad-Din. This betrayal intensified the conflict between the various factions vying for control in Egypt, making it a central battleground in the broader struggle for dominance in the region. After Minister Shawar was reinstated to his position and established his rule, he betrayed Asad al-Din Shirkuh and called upon the Crusaders, who besieged him in Bilbais for 3 months. Asad al-Din had surveyed the country and understood its conditions, but under the pressure of attacks from the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, as well as continuous campaigns on Egypt and the lack of Syrian troops, he was forced to withdraw from the country. News reached Nur al-Din in Damascus, as well as Asad al-Din, regarding Shawar's correspondence with the Crusaders and the agreements reached between them. Both feared that Egypt might fall under Crusader control, thereby giving them control over all surrounding regions. Consequently, Asad al-Din prepared an army and left Damascus, with Nur al-Din sending reinforcements and Salah al-Din, in service of his uncle, Asad al-Din. Asad al-Din's arrival coincided with the Crusaders' entry into the region, leading them to form an alliance with the Fatimids. A major battle ensued in the desert of Giza, known as the Battle of Al-Babein. In this battle, Salah al-Din played a crucial role, as the Fatimid and Crusader forces were numerically superior to the Syrian army. Shirkuh positioned Salah al-Din at the center, believing the Crusaders would attack there, thinking Shirkuh himself would be in the center. Shirkuh took command of the right flank, supported by his brave troops, while the left flank was led by Kurdish leaders. At the battle's outset, the Crusaders launched their attack on the center, which eventually withdrew in an orderly fashion under the assault. Shirkuh then encircled them in a classic pincer movement. Some Western historians argue that the rough terrain, dense sand, and the heavy European horses and armored Crusader soldiers contributed to their defeat, allowing the Syrian army to emerge victorious. Salah al-Din managed to capture one of the Crusader commanders after attacking their flank, specifically the one leading the army of Caesarea. After this victory, Asad al-Din turned toward Alexandria, a city known for its animosity toward Shawar, and its gates were opened to him. However, Amalric of Jerusalem and Shawar quickly reorganized their forces. Despite the heavy losses they had suffered, their army still outnumbered that of Asad al-Din. They imposed a harsh siege on Alexandria, where signs of famine soon began to appear. Faced with this dire situation, Asad al-Din decided to sneak out of Alexandria with a small garrison, leaving Salah al-Din in charge of the city. Asad al-Din then headed toward Upper Egypt, hoping to draw Amalric's forces away from Alexandria. However, Shawar insisted on the strategic importance of Alexandria, and the siege continued. Crusader sources claim that Asad al-Din fled Alexandria when conditions deteriorated and that he initiated negotiations for both armies to leave Egypt without punishing Alexandria's inhabitants for their support. One of the primary reasons Amalric agreed to this deal was Nur al-Din Zengi's raid on the county of Tripoli, which alarmed Amalric about the safety of his territories in the Levant. In contrast, Arab sources state that Asad al-Din separated from Salah al-Din immediately after entering Alexandria and began launching raids in Upper Egypt. When the siege of Alexandria intensified, Asad al-Din advanced toward the city, but the Crusaders intercepted him with a peace offer. He agreed to their terms, which stipulated that both the Crusader and Syrian armies would withdraw from Egypt. Consequently, the Syrian army departed Egypt on August 18, 1167. In 1169, Nur al-Din sent Shirkuh back to Egypt with a military campaign aimed at reclaiming control of the country and removing Shawar, who had become a dual threat. Shirkuh's forces succeeded in entering Cairo after numerous skirmishes, making it clear that Shawar's days were numbered. In the face of increasing pressure, Shawar's reliance on the Crusaders, who had supported him, diminished, leaving him isolated and vulnerable. Shirkuh ordered Shawar's execution, a symbolic move signaling the end of the era of betrayal and the start of a new phase in Egypt's political landscape. However, the transition wasn't without its challenges. Shortly after assuming power, Shirkuh died suddenly due to illness, leaving a power vacuum. This unexpected death paved the way for Salah al-Din. With the support of Nur al-Din's forces, Salah al-Din took over as the vizier. Despite his relatively young age, he embarked on significant political and military reforms, laying the groundwork for his emergence as one of the most influential leaders in Islamic history and for Egypt to become the center of his rule in future conflicts with the Crusaders. Inaugurated as vizier on the 26th of March, having gained more power and independence than ever before in his career, he still faced the issue of ultimate loyalty between al-Adid and Nur ad-Din. Later in the year, a group of Egyptian soldiers and emirs attempted to assassinate Saladin, but having already known of their intentions thanks to his intelligence chief Ali ibn Sufyan, he had the chief conspirator, Naji, Mu'taman al-Khalifa, the civilian controller of the Fatimid palace, arrested and killed. The day after, 50,000 black African soldiers from the regiments of the Fatimid army opposed to Saladin's rule, along with Egyptian emirs and commoners, staged a revolt. By the 23rd of August, Saladin had decisively quelled the uprising, and never again had to face a military challenge from Cairo. Towards the end of 1169, Saladin, with reinforcements from Nur ad-Din, defeated a massive Crusader Byzantine force near Damietta. Afterwards, in the spring of 1170, Nur ad-Din sent Saladin's father to Egypt in compliance with Saladin's request, as well as encouragement from the Baghdad-based Abbasid Caliph, Mustanjid Billah, who aimed to pressure Saladin in deposing his rival Caliph, al-Adid. Saladin had been strengthening his hold on Egypt and widening his support base there. He began granting his family members high-ranking positions in the region. He ordered the construction of a college for the Maliki branch of Sunni Islam in the city, as well as one for the Shafi'i denomination to which he belonged in al-Fustat. After consolidating his rule in Egypt, Salah al-Din launched a campaign against the Crusaders. In 1170, he laid siege to the city of Deir al-Balah. King Amalric I and his Templar garrison set out from Gaza to confront Salah al-Din, but the latter skillfully evaded the Crusader army and redirected his march toward Gaza itself, where he destroyed the settlement the Crusaders had built outside the city's walls. Some historical records indicate that during this period, Salah al-Din captured the fortress of Eilat, which the Crusaders had constructed on a small island in the Gulf of Aqaba. Although the fortress posed no significant threat to the Islamic navy, its garrison occasionally harassed small merchant ships and boats. After this victory, the Zengids firmly established their presence in Egypt, and it became clear that the Fatimid Caliphate was breathing its last. Nur al-Din sent a directive to Salah al-Din, instructing him to cease prayers for the Fatimid Caliph and instead proclaim allegiance to the Abbasid Caliph in Egypt's mosques. Salah al-Din was initially reluctant to comply, fearing backlash from the Shiite influence in Egypt, and sought to delay implementing the order. However, Nur al-Din threatened to come to Cairo himself if the matter was not resolved. Faced with this pressure, Salah al-Din made the necessary preparations, yet no one dared to take the decisive step. It was only when a Sunni sheikh visiting from Mosul stood in the Al-Azhar mosque and delivered a sermon in the name of the Abbasid Caliph, al-Mustadi Billah, during the first Friday of September 1171, that the shift began. Soon, all of Cairo followed suit. At the same time, the Fatimid Caliph al-Adid lay bedridden and gravely ill. He passed away shortly afterward, leaving Salah al-Din as the de facto ruler of Egypt, with no one to challenge his authority. Thus, the Fatimid Caliphate came to a complete end after having lasted for 262 years. On September 25, Salah al-Din left Cairo to participate in a joint attack on Karak and Montreal, the desert fortresses of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, alongside Nur al-Din, who would advance from Syria. However, before reaching Montreal, Salah al-Din withdrew to Cairo upon receiving reports that Crusader leaders had increased their support for traitors within Egypt during his absence. These traitors, especially the Fatimids, were allegedly conspiring to reclaim their past glory by undermining Salah al-Din's authority from within. As a result, Nur al-Din continued his campaign alone. During the summer of 1173, news arrived of a Nubian army accompanied by a contingent of former Armenian Fatimid forces stationed on Egypt's borders, preparing to besiege Aswan. The emir of the city requested Salah al-Din's assistance, and he sent reinforcements under the command of his brother, Turan Shah. Consequently, the Nubians retreated but returned later that year. This time, the Egyptian forces advanced from Aswan and captured the Nubian city of Ibrim. Salah al-Din sent a gift to Nur al-Din, his friend and mentor, consisting of 60,000 dinars, magnificent manufactured goods, some jewelry, and an elephant. While transporting these goods to Damascus, Salah al-Din seized the opportunity to devastate the Crusader countryside. Instead of pressing an attack on the desert fortresses, he focused on expelling the Muslim Bedouins living in Crusader territories to deprive the Franks of local guides. On July 31, 1173, Salah al-Din's father, Ayyub, death on August 9. In 1174, Salah al-Din sent Turan Shah to conquer Yemen, thereby annexing its territory and the strategic port of Aden into the Ayyubid state. Tensions between Salah al-Din and Nur al-Din emerged due to intertwined interests and political shifts following Salah al-Din's rise to power in Egypt. In the early summer of 1174, Nur ad-Din was mustering an army, sending summons to Mosul, Diyarbakir, and the Vizierate in an apparent preparation of an attack against Salah al-Din. The Ayyubids held a council upon the revelation of these preparations to discuss the possible threat, and Saladin collected his own troops outside Cairo. On the 15th of May, Nur ad-Din died after falling ill the previous week, and his power was handed to his 11-year-old son, Al-Salih Ismail. His death left Saladin with political independence. In the wake of Nur ad-Din's death, Saladin faced a difficult decision. He could move his army against the Crusaders from Egypt or wait until invited by Al-Salih in Syria to come to his aid and launch a war from there. He could also take it upon himself to annex Syria before it could possibly fall into the hands of a rival, but he feared that attacking a land that formerly belonged to his master, forbidden in the Islamic principles in which he believed, could portray him as hypocritical, thus making him unsuitable for leading the war against the Crusaders. Saladin saw that in order to acquire Syria, he needed either an invitation from Al-Salih or to warn him that potential anarchy could give rise to danger from the Crusaders. When Al-Salih was removed to Aleppo in August, Gumushtagan, the emir of the city and a captain of Nur ad-Din's veterans, assumed guardianship over him. The emir prepared to unseat all his rivals in Syria and the Vizierate, beginning with Damascus. In this emergency, the emir of Damascus appealed to Saif ad-Din of Mosul, a cousin of Gumushtagan, for assistance against Aleppo, but he refused, forcing the Syrians to request the aid of Saladin, who complied. Saladin rode across the desert with 700 picked horsemen, passing through Al-Karak, then reaching Bosra. according to his own account, was joined by emirs, soldiers, and Bedouins, the emotions of their hearts to be seen on their faces. On the 23rd of November, he arrived in Damascus amid general acclamation and rested at his father's old home there, until the gates of the citadel of Damascus, whose commander Raihan initially refused to surrender, were opened to Saladin 4 days later, after a brief siege by his brother Tutakan ibn Ayyub. He installed himself in the castle and received the homage and salutations of the inhabitants. Leaving his brother Tutakan as governor of Damascus, Saladin proceeded to reduce other cities that had belonged to Nur ad-Din, but were now practically independent. His army conquered Hama with relative ease, but avoided attacking Homs because of the strength of its citadel. Saladin moved north towards Aleppo, besieging it on the 30th of December after Gumushtagan refused to abdicate his throne. Al-Saleh, fearing capture by Saladin, came out of his palace and appealed to the inhabitants not to surrender him and the city to the invading force. One of Saladin's chroniclers claimed, "The people came under his spell." Gumushtagan requested Rashid ad-Din Shanan, chief Dai of the assassins of Syria, who were already at odds with Saladin since he replaced the Fatimids of Egypt, to assassinate Saladin in his camp. On the 11th of May 1175, a group of 13 assassins easily gained admission into Saladin's camp, but were detected immediately before they carried out their attack by Kamatikan. One was killed by one of Saladin's generals and the others were slain while trying to escape. To deter Saladin's progress, Raymond of Tripoli gathered his forces by Nahr al-Kabir, where they were well placed for an attack on Muslim territory. Saladin later moved toward Homs instead, but retreated after being told a relief force was being sent to the city by Saif ad-Din. Meanwhile, Saladin's rivals in Syria and Vizierate waged a propaganda war against him, claiming he had forgotten his own condition, servant of Nur ad-Din, and showed no gratitude for his old master by besieging his son, rising in rebellion against his lord. Saladin aimed to counter this propaganda by ending the siege, claiming that he was defending Islam from the Crusaders. His army returned to Hama to engage a Crusader force there. The Crusaders withdrew beforehand and Saladin proclaimed it a victory, opening the gates of men's hearts. Soon after, Saladin entered Homs and captured its citadel in March 1175, after stubborn resistance from its defenders. Saladin's growing power greatly unsettled Saif ad-Din, the leader of the Zengid dynasty. Alongside his ally Gumushtagan, Saif ad-Din viewed Syria and Mesopotamia as the rightful inheritance of his family. Saladin's attempts to expand into their territories were seen as a direct challenge to their authority. In response, Saif ad-Din assembled a formidable army and sent it to Aleppo, where the city's defenders eagerly awaited reinforcements. The united forces of Mosul and Aleppo advanced towards Saladin's position in Hama. Facing a significant numerical disadvantage, Saladin initially sought to negotiate, offering to relinquish all his conquests north of the Damascus province. However, the Zengids rejected the proposal, demanding that Saladin return to Egypt entirely. Realizing that conflict was inevitable, Saladin prepared for battle, strategically positioning his forces at the horns of Hama, a range of hills overlooking the Orontes River gorge. On April 13, 1175, the Zengid forces launched their attack. However, they were soon encircled by Saladin's seasoned Ayyubid troops, who decisively defeated them. The battle concluded with a crushing victory for Saladin, who pursued the retreating Zengid forces all the way to the gates of Aleppo. This compelled the advisors of Al-Saleh, the Zengid ruler, to acknowledge Saladin's authority over Damascus, Homs, and Hama. Following his victory over the Zengids, Saladin declared himself king, removing as-Saleh's name from Friday prayers and Islamic coinage. He commanded that prayers in all mosques of Syria and Egypt be held in his name as the sovereign ruler. At the Cairo mint, he issued gold coins bearing his official title, Al-Malik and Nasir Yusuf Ayyub. The Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad warmly acknowledged Saladin's rise to power, officially granting him the title of Sultan of Egypt and Syria. However, The Battle of Hama did not mark the end of the struggle for dominance between the Ayyubids and Zengids. The final confrontation occurred in the spring of 1176. Saladin had amassed significant reinforcements from Egypt, while Saif ad-Din was raising troops from the smaller states of Diyarbakir and Al-Jazira. As Saladin led his forces north from Hama, crossing the Orontes River, a solar eclipse occurred. Viewing it as an ominous sign, he nonetheless pressed on. His army reached the Sultan's Mound, about 25 kilometers from Aleppo, where they encountered Saif ad-Din's troops. A fierce hand-to-hand battle ensued. Initially, the Zengid forces broke through Saladin's left flank and pushed it back. However, Saladin personally led a charge against the Zengid vanguard, causing panic among their ranks. The Zengid army collapsed, with most of Saif ad-Din's officers either killed or captured, while Saif ad-Din himself narrowly escaped. The Ayyubids seized the Zengid camp, along with their horses, baggage, tents, and supplies. Yet, in a gesture of magnanimity, Saladin ordered that the Zengid prisoners be given gifts and released. As for the spoils of war, Saladin distributed them entirely among his troops, keeping none for himself. Saladin continued his march toward Aleppo, which remained firmly closed to him, and paused his advance before the city. On the way, his army captured Buzar and later took control of Manbij. From there, they moved westward to lay siege to the fortress of Azaz on May 15. A few days into the siege, while Saladin was resting in one of his captain's tents, an assassin infiltrated the camp and attacked him with a knife. Fortunately, Saladin's head armor deflected the blow, and he managed to seize the attacker's hand. Though his gambeson was slashed, he escaped serious injury, and the assailant was quickly killed. This assassination attempt deeply unsettled Saladin, who suspected Gumushtagan and the assassins of conspiring against him. Determined to retaliate, he intensified the siege efforts, and Azaz surrendered on June 21. With this victory, Saladin swiftly redirected his army toward Aleppo to confront Gumushtagan. Although his attacks on the city were repelled, Saladin negotiated a truce and forged a mutual alliance with Aleppo. The agreement allowed Gumushtagan and al-Saleh to maintain their control over the city, while they, in turn, recognized Saladin's sovereignty over the territories he had conquered. The emirs of Mardin and Kiefer, Aleppo's Muslim allies, also acknowledged Saladin as the king of Syria. As part of the treaty's conclusion, al-Saleh's younger sister approached Saladin to request the return of the fortress of Azaz. Saladin honored her request and personally escorted her to Aleppo's gates, presenting her with numerous gifts. By this time, Saladin had secured truces with both his Zengid rivals and the Kingdom of Jerusalem, but he faced a looming threat from the assassins, led by Rashid ad-Din Sanar. This group, based in the An-Nusayriya Mountains, controlled 9 formidable fortresses built on strategic high ground. In August 1176, Saladin led an expedition into the An-Nusayriya range after dispatching most of his troops to Egypt. Despite devastating the surrounding countryside, he failed to capture any of the assassins' forts and retreated within the same month. Many Muslim historians attribute this withdrawal to mediation efforts by Saladin's uncle, the governor of Hama, who reportedly brokered a peace agreement between Saladin and Sanar. While besieging Masyaf, Saladin had his guards stationed vigilantly around his tent to detect any infiltration attempts by the assassins. However, he ultimately withdrew his forces, partly due to the immediate need to counter a Crusader force near Mount Lebanon. In reality, Saladin sought to establish an alliance with Sanar and his assassins, neutralizing him as a threat and depriving the Crusaders of a valuable ally. Recognizing the mutual benefits of expelling the Crusaders, Saladin and Sanar maintained cooperative relations thereafter. Sanar even dispatched contingents of his forces to support Saladin in several critical battles that followed, further cementing their alliance. After departing the An-Nusayriya Mountains, Saladin returned to Damascus, where he disbanded his Syrian troops, allowing them to return to their homes. He appointed to run Shah to oversee Syria and departed for Egypt with only his closest followers, arriving in Cairo on the 22nd of September. Having been away for nearly 2 years, Saladin faced significant tasks in reorganizing and supervising Egypt's affairs. One of his primary efforts was to strengthen and rebuild Cairo's fortifications. The city walls were repaired, and plans for their expansion were set in motion. Construction of the Cairo citadel also began under his orders, including the excavation of the 280-foot deep Yusuf well. Beyond Cairo, Saladin initiated key public works, the most notable being the large bridge at Giza. This structure was designed to serve as an additional defensive measure against the threat of a potential Moorish invasion. When King Amalric I passed away in 1174, the Kingdom of Jerusalem faced a period of internal and external turmoil. He was succeeded by his son, Baldwin IV, who was only 13 years old at the time and already suffering from leprosy, a condition that raised significant concerns about his ability to rule. At this critical juncture, the kingdom required a strong leader to confront rising challenges, particularly the growing power of Saladin in Egypt and the Levant. Due to Baldwin's youth and illness, Raymond III, Count of Tripoli, assumed the regency, striving to maintain the kingdom's stability and safeguard its interests. Despite his youth and fragile health, Baldwin IV displayed remarkable courage and determination. He understood the precarious position of his realm, threatened internally by noble factionalism and externally by Saladin's expanding influence. In November 1177, Saladin launched a daring campaign into Palestine, seeking to exploit a moment of weakness among the Crusader states. The fragile truce between the two powers had already been fractured by a Crusader incursion into the region around Damascus. Viewing the agreement as void, Saladin saw an opportunity to strike. At the time, the Crusaders had diverted much of their military strength to the north, besieging the fortress of Haram near Aleppo, leaving the southern territories of Palestine poorly defended. Saladin mobilized an impressive force for the campaign. According to chronicler William of Tyre, his army numbered approximately 26,000 men, including 8,000 seasoned elite troops and 18,000 soldiers from Sudan. This formidable army advanced with confidence, targeting the vulnerable countryside. Saladin's forces marched towards Ascalon, a city he described as the Bride of Syria, a term reflecting its strategic importance and allure. As they pushed deeper into Crusader territory, Saladin's army conducted a series of destructive raids, devastating the surrounding regions. Towns such as Ramla and Lod fell victim to looting and destruction, while smaller detachments spread out, extending their reach perilously close to the very gates of Jerusalem itself. The campaign showcased Saladin's tactical ambition and the vulnerability of the Crusader states during moments of strategic overextension. Baldwin IV demonstrated remarkable boldness and strategic trust in his Gaza-based Knights Templar during Saladin's raid into Palestine. Despite commanding a mere 375 knights, Baldwin led his force into Ascalon without the usual precautions against an ambush. Saladin, aware of the formidable reputation of the Templar generals, refrained from launching a surprise attack, understanding the risks of engaging such highly skilled warriors in unfavorable conditions. The decisive moment came on November 25, 1177, near Ramla, at the Battle of Montgisard. Saladin's Ayyubid forces were caught off guard, with much of the army absent and unprepared for the sudden assault. The Templar Knights, with their disciplined combat style, quickly closed the distance and engaged Saladin's men in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Saladin initially attempted to rally his troops and form a defensive line, but the relentless charge of the Crusaders overwhelmed his forces. His personal bodyguards fell around him, and recognizing the futility of resistance, Saladin made a narrow escape. Mounting a swift camel, he fled with a small group of survivors, retreating to the safety of Egyptian-held territories. The battle was a devastating blow to Saladin's campaign and a testament to the resilience and strategic prowess of Baldwin IV and his Knights Templar. Despite his defeat at Montgisard, Saladin remained determined to confront the Crusaders once more. In the spring of 1178, he stationed his forces near Homs, where sporadic skirmishes broke out between his generals and the Crusader army. His troops in Hama achieved a victory, capturing spoils and prisoners of war, whom Saladin subsequently ordered to be executed. The remainder of the year passed without any significant engagements between Saladin and his enemies as he stayed in Syria. Reports from Saladin's intelligence network revealed that the Crusaders were planning a raid into Syrian territory. In response, Saladin instructed his general Farrukh Shah to monitor the Damascus frontier with a force of 1,000 men. Farrukh Shah was to avoid direct combat, retreat when necessary, and light warning beacons on the hills to signal Saladin, who would then mobilize his forces. In April 1179, Crusaders led by King Baldwin launched a surprise attack on Muslim herders grazing their flocks east of the Golan Heights, anticipating minimal resistance. Baldwin pursued Farrukh Shah's forces recklessly toward Quneitra, where the Crusader army was decisively defeated by the Ayyubids. Following this success, Saladin called for reinforcements from Egypt, requesting his brother Al-Adel to send 1,500 cavalry. During the summer of 1179, Baldwin established an outpost along the road to Damascus, aiming to fortify a strategic crossing over the Jordan River, known as Jacob's Ford. This position, dividing the Benares plain between Muslims and Christians, posed a direct threat to the Muslim territories. Saladin offered Baldwin 100,000 gold pieces to abandon the project, but his offer was rejected. Resolving to eliminate the threat, Saladin relocated his headquarters to Benares and prepared to destroy the fortress, known as Chastelet, defended by Templar knights. When the Crusaders attempted to counter Saladin's forces, their infantry fell behind, leaving them vulnerable. Saladin capitalized on the disarray, rallying his troops and launching a decisive counterattack that captured numerous high-ranking Crusader knights. Afterward, he besieged the fortress, which fell on the 30th of August 1179. By the spring of 1180, Saladin was preparing for an extensive campaign against the Kingdom of Jerusalem. However, King Baldwin, facing internal pressures and resource shortages, sent peace proposals. A severe drought and poor harvests had also strained Saladin's logistical support, prompting him to accept a truce. Raymond of Tripoli opposed the agreement but was forced to comply after an Ayyubid raid on his lands in May and the sighting of Saladin's naval fleet near the port of Tartus. Salah al-Din took advantage of the pause in fighting with the Crusaders and attempted to seize control of Mosul from the remaining Zengids but failed to do so. Instead of Mosul, he succeeded in capturing Aleppo. The Zengid dynasty remained in power in the region until the Mongol invasion in 1250. In 1185, Baldwin IV, known as the Leper King, passed away after a prolonged battle with leprosy. Despite his illness, Baldwin IV demonstrated remarkable military and political acumen during his reign, but he recognized the need for a stable succession to secure the kingdom's future. Due to his declining health, he named his young nephew, Baldwin V, as his successor, with Raymond III of Tripoli serving as regent. However, Baldwin V's reign was short-lived. The young king died under mysterious circumstances in 1186, only a year after ascending the throne. His death plunged the kingdom into a succession crisis. Sibylla, Baldwin IV's sister and Baldwin V's mother, claimed the throne. During the reign of Baldwin IV, his sister Sibylla was married to Guy of Lusignan in 1180. This union was orchestrated by Baldwin IV and key political advisors, aiming to secure a strong alliance for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. However, the marriage was controversial from the start, as many nobles viewed Guy as incompetent and ill-suited for leadership. Baldwin IV later grew disillusioned with Guy's ability to lead, especially after his failure in military campaigns, and distanced him from political and military authority. Despite this, Sibylla remained loyal to her husband, showcasing her determination and steadfast commitment to their union, even in the face of growing opposition from influential nobles such as Raymond III of Tripoli. This marriage laid the groundwork for the succession disputes that would follow Baldwin IV's death, as Sibylla and Guy's position in the kingdom polarized the nobility and undermined unity at a time when the Crusader states faced mounting external threats, particularly from Saladin's ascendant forces. After all this, Guy of Lusignan became the king of Jerusalem. In 1187, tensions between Muslims and Crusaders reached a breaking point due to ongoing provocations, particularly by Reynaud de Chatillon, who attacked Muslim trade caravans and pilgrim routes, enraging Saladin. Unifying the Muslim forces under his leadership, Saladin laid siege to the city of Tiberias, prompting King Guy de Lusignan to lead the Crusader army on a grueling march in the scorching summer heat to confront the Muslims. Saladin capitalized on the Crusaders' exhaustion and lack of water, setting an ambush at the strategic site of Hattin. The battle occurred on July 4, where Saladin's forces decisively defeated the Crusaders, inflicting heavy casualties and capturing many. Saladin captured Reynaud de Chatillon and personally executed him in retribution for his attacks on Muslim caravans. Members of these caravans had pleaded for mercy by invoking the truce between Muslims and Crusaders, but Reynaud ignored them, insulted the Prophet Muhammad, and tortured and killed some of them. Upon hearing of this, Saladin vowed to execute Reynaud personally. Guy of Lusignan was also captured. When he witnessed Reynaud's execution, he feared he would be next. However, Saladin spared his life, saying of Reynaud, "It is not the custom of kings to kill kings, but this man exceeded all limits, and thus I treated him accordingly." In the aftermath of Saladin's monumental victory at the Battle of Hattin, most Crusader cities fell under his control. Determined to recapture Jerusalem, Saladin preferred a peaceful surrender, offering generous terms to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. However, the defenders within Jerusalem, led by Balian of Ibelin, refused his initial proposals, vowing to destroy the city and its sacred sites rather than surrender. The siege began in September 1187, and Saladin's forces gradually tightened their hold. Balian, realizing the futility of resistance, negotiated terms, threatening to massacre Muslim prisoners and demolish Islamic holy sites unless the city's inhabitants were granted safe passage. After consulting his council, Saladin agreed to these demands. On October 2, 1187, Jerusalem surrendered. The terms allowed for a ransom to be paid for each resident's freedom, set at an unusually low rate. Saladin, demonstrating clemency, permitted many families unable to pay their ransom to leave freely. Patriarch Heraclius organized a collection to aid the poor, freeing around 18,000 citizens. Despite these efforts, around 15,000 inhabitants were enslaved, highlighting both the merciful and pragmatic aspects of Saladin's leadership. After his capture of Jerusalem in 1187, Saladin turned his attention to the remaining Crusader strongholds, with Tyre becoming a critical focal point. Tyre, located on the coast of modern-day Lebanon, remained the last major Crusader city not under Muslim control. Strategically, its capture would have been logical for consolidating Saladin's hold over the region. However, Saladin prioritized Jerusalem due to its unparalleled religious significance to Islam. Tyre was commanded by Conrad of Montferrat, whose leadership and fortification efforts ensured the city's defense. Saladin's forces launched 2 sieges against Tyre, but Conrad's steadfast resistance thwarted both attempts, leaving the city under Crusader control. In 1188, at Tortosa, Saladin made a calculated move by releasing Guy of Lusignan, the former king of Jerusalem, and returning him to his wife, Sibylla. Guy traveled to Tripoli and Antioch before making an attempt in 1189 to reclaim Tyre as a base for the Crusader kingdom. However, Conrad, disputing Guy's legitimacy as king, refused him entry. Undeterred, Guy shifted his focus to Acre, setting the stage for a new chapter in the Crusader struggle. The Third Crusade was launched in response to the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin in 1187. The capture of the Holy City by Muslim forces triggered outrage throughout Europe, leading to widespread calls for a new crusade. Pope Gregory VIII issued a call to arms, urging Christian leaders to reclaim Jerusalem and restore Christian control over the Holy Land. One of the key figures of the crusade was King Richard I of England, known as Richard the Lionheart, who became the most prominent and recognizable leader. Richard was a skilled military leader, known for his bravery and determination. Alongside him was Philip II of France, though their relationship soon became strained due to disagreements over strategy and leadership, leading to Philip withdrawing from the campaign. Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor, also played a crucial role, but his army was decimated when he drowned while crossing a river in Asia Minor, leading to the collapse of his forces. The Crusaders besieged the city of Acre, a major port city that had fallen to Saladin in 1189. After a prolonged siege, the Crusaders managed to capture Acre in July 1191, despite heavy casualties. However, tensions between Richard and Philip led to Philip withdrawing from the crusade, leaving Richard to continue alone. Richard launched a campaign to capture key coastal cities, including Jaffa, but his efforts to capture Jerusalem ultimately failed due to strong Muslim defenses and his own inability to breach the city. In 1192, a truce was reached through the Treaty of Jaffa, which allowed Christians limited access to Jerusalem under Muslim control. The Third Crusade ended without fully reclaiming Jerusalem, but it secured Christian control over key coastal cities, marking a significant yet partial success for the Crusader states in the region. Saladin passed away on March 4, 1193, in Damascus, shortly after King Richard's departure. At the time of his death, Saladin possessed only 1 piece of gold and 40 pieces of silver. He had generously donated his vast wealth to the poor, leaving nothing to cover the costs of his own funeral. Saladin was buried in a mausoleum located in the garden outside the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, Syria. Although the state founded by Saladin did not last long after his death, Saladin is regarded in the Arab and Islamic consciousness as the liberator of Jerusalem. With the rise of Arab nationalism in the 20th century, particularly in the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict, Saladin's heroism and leadership gained renewed significance. His role in freeing Jerusalem from the Crusaders became a source of inspiration for the modern Arab opposition to Zionism. His character has been depicted in epic poems, historical narratives, and national education curricula in Arab countries. Numerous books have been written about his life, and his story has been adapted into plays, documentaries, and dramas. Saladin remains a symbol of an ideal Muslim leader who confronted his enemies decisively, striving to liberate Muslim lands while upholding honor and high moral values. In 1161, Baldwin IV was born into the heart of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a land deeply entrenched in the conflicts between East and West. His father, King Amalric I, was one of the most prominent rulers of the Crusader state, renowned for his strategic brilliance and ambition to strengthen the kingdom. Amalric hailed from the noble Lusignan family, a European lineage with a storied history of knighthood and dominion. His mother, Agnes of Courtenay, belonged to the aristocratic Courtenay family, a French house with significant political influence in the Crusader states. Despite their noble roots, their marriage faced fierce opposition from political and religious factions. The nobles of the kingdom were strongly opposed to Amalric's wife, Agnes. They were likely threatened by the prospect of her increased influence. The High Court forced Amalric to agree to an annulment of his marriage on the grounds of consanguinity in order to be accepted as king. Amalric succeeded in having his and Agnes's children, Sibylla and Baldwin, declared legitimate despite the annulment. Baldwin's godfather was his paternal uncle, King Baldwin III, who joked that his christening present was the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The kingdom and other Crusader principalities, though surrounded by Arab Muslim states, were ruled by Franks, French-speaking Catholics who had arrived in the Levant from Western Europe and remained Western in culture. The king was young and recently married, making a nephew's accession seem unlikely. Yet Baldwin III died childless in 1163, Amalric was his heir. Before Baldwin IV's birth in 1161, The political and military landscape of the Levant was shaped by the aftermath of the First and Second Crusades, leaving the Kingdom of Jerusalem and surrounding regions in a precarious state. The First Crusade was launched in 1096, prompted by Pope Urban II's call to reclaim the Holy Land from Islamic control. After a grueling campaign, the Crusaders captured Jerusalem in 1099, establishing the Kingdom of Jerusalem as the political and religious center of their efforts. Alongside Jerusalem, other Crusader states, such as the Principality of Antioch, the County of Edessa, and the County of Tripoli, were founded, creating a fragile alliance of Christian-held territories. While the kingdom initially enjoyed success, it soon faced relentless threats from neighboring Islamic powers. The rapid expansion and limited resources of the Crusader states left them strategically vulnerable. The Kingdom of Jerusalem relied heavily on reinforcements and supplies from Europe, making it susceptible to European political turmoil. The Crusader states struggled to sustain a self-sufficient military and economy. Internally, the Muslim and Jewish populations under Crusader rule experienced heavy taxation and repression, fueling resentment and resistance. Externally, Islamic forces in the Levant and Egypt began organizing against the Crusaders. Despite internal divisions, leaders like Ahmad al-Din Zangi emerged to challenge Crusader dominance. Zangi's capture of Edessa in 1144 marked the first significant Muslim victory against the Crusaders and triggered the Second Crusade. The Second Crusade, led by King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany, was launched to reclaim Edessa. However, poor coordination and internal conflicts led to a disastrous campaign. The crusade ended in failure, further weakening the Crusader states and emboldening Muslim forces. By the mid-12th century, the Muslim forces in the Levant were becoming increasingly unified. Nur al-Din Zangi, Ahmad al-Din's son, consolidated power in Aleppo and Damascus, creating a formidable front against the Crusaders. Nur al-Din also promoted the concept of jihad as both a religious and political tool to rally support for his cause. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Jerusalem grappled with internal divisions among its nobility and the constant threat of invasion. The kingdom's resources were stretched thin, and its leaders faced mounting challenges in maintaining their territories and defending against an increasingly coordinated enemy. By the time Baldwin IV was born, the Crusader states were in a state of constant defense, struggling to fend off the growing strength of Muslim leaders like Nur al-Din. The fragile stability of the Kingdom of Jerusalem foreshadowed the turbulent reign of Baldwin IV, who would inherit a realm in desperate need of unity and strong leadership. At the age of 6, Baldwin gained a stepmother, Maria Comnena, with whom he was not close. Queen Maria was an ambitious woman who likely saw Baldwin as an obstacle to her own children. King Amalric ensured that Baldwin, as the heir apparent to the kingdom, received a good education. The 9-year-old prince was sent to live with William of Tyre, a sophisticated and well-traveled cleric who was famed for his learning. William noticed that, unlike other children in the playground, Baldwin did not cry when pinched by his peers. After a while it became apparent to the tutor that Baldwin could not feel pain in his right arm. The king hired the Arab physician Abu Suleiman Dawood to treat Baldwin and another Arab, Abulker, to teach Baldwin horse riding, an essential skill for a Frankish nobleman. Having sensation in only one hand, Baldwin needed to learn to control the horse in battle using solely his knees, and mastered riding despite the handicap. Leprosy was suspected, but there were no visible symptoms yet and physicians hesitated to diagnose because of the stigma the boy would face. Had such a diagnosis been made when he was a child, Baldwin might have been required by law to enter the Order of St. Lazarus, a military order composed of affected knights and sergeants. Amalric I of Jerusalem passed away on July 11, 1174, leaving the throne to his young, leprosy-stricken son. Amalric had been suffering from dysentery, a common and often fatal ailment in the medieval period, exacerbated by the poor sanitation and harsh conditions of the Levant. While he had shown resilience in his earlier campaigns and governance, his health began to deteriorate in the years leading up to his death. His illness likely worsened during the politically and militarily exhausting campaigns against Nur al-Din and the Muslim forces encroaching on the Crusader states. Despite these challenges, Amalric continued to govern actively, attempting to secure the kingdom's future. In the final weeks of his life, Amalric's condition became critical. The illness left him weakened, and he was unable to recover despite the medical knowledge of the time. He passed away in Jerusalem, leaving behind a kingdom with mounting internal and external pressures. His death not only left the throne to Baldwin IV, a child already grappling with leprosy, but also set the stage for political instability, as the regency would now become a crucial element of the kingdom's governance. Upon Amalric's death, the High Court convened to discuss the succession. Though he had not yet been diagnosed, the High Court must have been aware of the royal physician's suspicions that Baldwin had contracted leprosy. Yet there was no viable alternative. Baldwin was the king's only son. From his second marriage, Amalric had 2 daughters, of which only Isabella survived infancy. Female succession was expressly allowed, but Sibylla was an unmarried adolescent and Isabella only 2 years old. The male candidates, Amalric's cousins Prince Bohemond III of Antioch, Baldwin of Antioch, and Count Raymond III of Tripoli, were politically unsuitable. Bohemond was bound to distant Antioch, Baldwin in the service of Byzantine Emperor Manuel I Komnenos, and Raymond virtually a stranger to the barons after 9 years spent in Muslim captivity. After 3 days of deliberation, Baldwin IV was chosen, with the expectation that a husband would be found for Sibylla to succeed him if he proved to be affected. The young king's coronation by the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Amalric of Nesle, took place immediately in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Until he reached the age of majority, which was 15 in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Baldwin needed a regent to rule in his name. The government was initially assumed by the seneschal, Miles of Plancy. Shortly thereafter, Count Raymond III of Tripoli arrived in Jerusalem and succeeded in claiming regency as the king's closest kinsman. Miles was murdered while trying to extend his hold on the government. No new seneschal was appointed for 2 years, and so the young and sickly king presided over burdensome high court meetings when the regent was away on military duties or in Tripoli. As a leper, Baldwin could not marry or expect to have children. It thus became a priority to arrange a marriage for Baldwin's sister and heir presumptive, Sibylla, with William of Montferrat in November 1176, despite misgivings of the nobles who no longer trusted his cousin Emperor Frederick's ability to aid the kingdom. Baldwin offered to resign the throne to William. He declined because he knew he lacked the support of the nobility. Around the same time, Nur ad-Din Zangi, the powerful sultan of the Zengid state and a formidable adversary to the Crusaders, passed away. His death triggered political instability in the Muslim territories, with internal disputes over succession creating divisions that temporarily allowed the Crusaders to stabilize their position. Saladin, then serving as the ruler of Egypt under Nur ad-Din's authority, quickly seized this opportunity. He began consolidating his power in the Levant, capitalizing on the weakened Zengid leadership. Within a few years, Saladin unified Egypt and Syria under his command, declaring himself sultan and effectively sidelining the Zengid dynasty, which set the stage for a more direct confrontation with the Crusaders. On the second anniversary of his coronation, the 15th of July 1176, Baldwin reached the age of majority and Raymond's regency lapsed. The king appointed his loyal and capable maternal uncle, Jocelyn of Courtenay, to the office of seneschal and arranged for him to marry a rich heiress, Agnes of Milly. The change in government signaled a new Frankish approach to the Egyptian ruler Saladin, who had been allowed by Raymond to encircle the Crusader states by conquering Muslim principalities in Syria. Baldwin did not ratify Raymond's peace treaty with Saladin, firmly agreeing with Jocelyn that the Sultan's power needed to be curbed. As soon as he took over the government, Baldwin began planning a full-scale attack on Egypt with his advisors. The king took advantage of Saladin's campaign in Aleppo to lead a raid around Damascus. This was his first experience of warfare. Despite having use of only one hand, He refused to delegate his military duties and took part in fighting. He and his advisors then decided to intervene in Saladin's war against the Order of Assassins. On the 1st of August, Baldwin and Raymond led the armies of Jerusalem and Tripoli, respectively, in a raid of the Bequa Valley, modern-day Lebanon, where they defeated the garrison of Damascus, forcing Saladin to abandon his campaign. In order to carry out his attack on Egypt, Baldwin needed naval support. He thus sent Reynold of Châtillon to lead an embassy to Emperor Manuel, Reynold's stepson-in-law, in Constantinople in the winter of 1176–77. Manuel agreed to take part in the invasion in return for the establishment of Byzantine protectorate over the kingdom and restoration of the Orthodox Patriarch, Leontius II, in Jerusalem. As Reynold's mission was successful, Baldwin consented to his marriage with the Lady of Alta-Jourdain, Stephanie of Milly. In April 1177, William of Montferrat fell sick with malaria in Ascalon, of which he had been made count on his marriage to the king's sister. Baldwin visited him and became gravely ill too. William died in June, leaving Sibylla pregnant and Baldwin incapacitated without a deputy ahead of a major war offensive. The king entrusted the government and military command to Reynold, snubbing the Count of Tripoli. Baldwin's first cousin Count Philip I of Flanders arrived in the east in September. He brought to Baldwin financial aid from another cousin, King Henry II of England. Henry was invested because he and Baldwin both belonged to the Angevin family. Still in sickbed in Ascalon, the king had himself taken back to Jerusalem in a litter and convened a general council, on the advice of which he offered regency to Philip. Philip declined, and Reynold retained his post. The Byzantines sent a war fleet in preparation of the invasion of Egypt, but to Baldwin's regret they withdrew because of the uncooperativeness of Philip of Flanders, Bohemond of Antioch, Raymond of Tripoli, and the Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, Roger de Moulins. Saladin's power remained unchecked, and the Byzantine alliance collapsed. Despite the hostility of the Latin Patriarch, Amalric of Nesle, Baldwin continued to court the Greek Patriarch, Leontius, in hopes that the Byzantines would remain committed to his kingdom. Philip left the Kingdom of Jerusalem with his troops in late October 1177 to help Raymond of Tripoli attack the Muslim-held city of Hama. With the Frankish army in northern Syria, Saladin seized the opportunity to invade Baldwin's kingdom on the 18th of November. Though still recovering from malaria, Baldwin rode to meet the Sultan, while the Knights Templar hurried to defend Gaza. The king took his humble host to Ascalon, where in desperation he issued an arriere ban, summoning all able-bodied men. Saladin reached Ascalon on the 22nd of November and Baldwin led the troops out to meet him. Seeing how drastically outnumbered he was, the king retreated into the city. Saladin too saw the strength in his numbers and confidently proceeded towards Jerusalem. Baldwin managed to contact the Templars, however, and ordered them to abandon Gaza and join him. Contrary to the Sultan's expectation, Baldwin and Reynold then rode out of Ascalon, joined up with the Templars, and attacked his dispersed army at Montgisard. The young king was in the forefront. Saladin, who barely survived, suffered a crushing defeat. Not having enough men to launch an offensive on the retreating Muslims, Baldwin decided to fortify the Damascene frontier. The Templars convinced him to build a castle, Chastelet, on the upper Jordan River. He was reluctant because the Franks had promised not to mark that part of the border. After protests of local Muslims, Saladin offered money to Baldwin in exchange for aborting the construction, but the king refused. In 1178, Baldwin hosted the Patriarch of the Syriac Orthodox Church, Michael the Syrian, in Jerusalem and won his lasting loyalty to Frankish cause. In April 1179, Baldwin intended to round up the sheep passing from Damascus to Benias. Saladin's nephew Farrukh Shah was sent to investigate the king's movement but suddenly ran into him, and a skirmish followed. The elderly but exceptionally able constable, Humphrey II of Tehran, sustained fatal wounds while protecting the king. Weeks later, Baldwin rode out to intercept Bedouin raids of Beirut and Sidon, and in June Saladin's raiding party routed Baldwin's. The king was unhorsed and carried to safety on a knight's back because he could not remount on his own. In late August, Baldwin summoned a host to Tiberias to respond to Saladin's siege of Le Chastelet, but the castle fell before the relic of the True Cross could be fetched from Jerusalem to accompany the Christian troops. In the winter of 1177–78, the king's widowed sister, Sibylla, gave birth to a son, Baldwin, named after the king. A year of official mourning for the child's father, William, concluded in June 1178, and it became appropriate to seek another husband for her. During the Holy Week in 1180, the Prince of Antioch and the Count of Tripoli marched with their armies to Jerusalem. It is most likely that their intention was to force the king to have Sibylla marry Baldwin of Ibelin and to then abdicate. The king had never approved of Baldwin's ambition to marry his sister, and though he did wish to abdicate, he was not keen on having terms forced on him. Baldwin acted decisively before his kinsman's armies reached Jerusalem. He arranged for Sibylla to marry a Poitevin knight, Guy of Lusignan. Raymond and Bohemond had no option but to accept the fait accompli, and the coup was foiled. In light of these problems, Baldwin proposed a 2-year truce with Saladin, who was glad to accept in order to campaign freely in northern Syria. Baldwin sent his uncle and chief minister, Jocelyn, to assure the Byzantine court that Jerusalem still needed their protection. During Jocelyn's absence, from mid-1180 to mid-1181, the full burden of government fell on the shoulders of the king, whose health was deteriorating. He relied chiefly on his mother in this period. To secure Guy's position and prevent the emergence of an alternative claimant, Baldwin had his 8-year-old half-sister, Isabella, solemnly betrothed to the teenage Lord of Tyrone, Humphrey IV, in October 1180. Isabella was then sent to live at Carac Castle with the Lady of Walterjordain, Humphrey's mother, as far as possible from her maternal kin and potential conspirators. By the terms of the marriage contract, Humphrey ceded Tyrone to Baldwin, who thus prevented the union of two great fiefs under one vassal and strengthened his position against the Count of Tripoli. Baldwin made use of the truce with Saladin to strengthen the position of his maternal kin, granting Marin and Chastel-Neuf to Jocelyn and Usufruct of Tyrone to Agnes, while associating Guy and Sibylla with him in public acts. He remained unreconciled with Raymond, however, and forbade the Count to enter the kingdom in early 1182 owing to suspicions of another conspiracy. Baldwin likely intended to charge Raymond with treason and deprive him of the Principality of Galilee, a fief of Jerusalem held by Raymond through marriage to Esquiva of Bues. The law prevented the king from seizing the fief without the assent of the High Court, and the High Court urged the king to reconcile with Raymond. Baldwin reluctantly heeded his vassal's advice. Baldwin's truce with Saladin was due to expire in May 1182, but was broken in mid-1181 by Reynold, who seized a merchant caravan on its way from Egypt to Damascus. Reynold ignored the king's request to make restitution to Saladin, who was then preparing to annex the Zengid-ruled Aleppo. The king, who consistently acted against Saladin's attempts to expand into northern Syria, decided to oppose him. The recent anti-Catholic coup in Constantinople gave Saladin confidence to attack the Kingdom of Jerusalem. In July, Baldwin marched with his host to relieve the Muslims' siege of Bethsan, and his outnumbered army won the Battle of La Forblet. The defeated Sultan took his host to besiege Beirut, while another army from Egypt attacked the south of the kingdom. Baldwin knew that he was being provoked into dividing his forces. Deciding that Beirut was of a greater strategic importance, he ignored the southern attack and moved with his troops to Tyre. From there, he procured assistance from the Italian maritime republics in lifting Saladin's naval blockade of Beirut. Saladin abandoned the siege, but declined to make a truce, worrying Baldwin and his advisors. He proceeded north to fight the Zengids, thereby expanding his realm, while Baldwin led an attack on Saladin's Damascene territory, then on Bosra, before finally laying siege and capturing Cave de South. In the winter of 1182 to 1183, after agreeing on a strategy with his council, Baldwin attacked Damascus again. He threatened to destroy a mosque in Daraa, but local Christians convinced him not to for fear of losing their churches in retaliation. Baldwin could not walk unsupported or use his hands from 1183. Because of an inability to blink, his cornea dried and he became blind. He nevertheless had to summon his troops in response to Saladin's march south following the Egyptian conquest of Aleppo in June. The king then developed a life-threatening fever. He was attended by his mother and the new patriarch, Heraclius, at nearby Nazareth. Having summoned the high court to his bedside, Baldwin entrusted the government to his brother-in-law, Guy, who was next in line to succeed him. Guy's appointment to regency was meant to be permanent. Baldwin retained only the royal title and authority over the city of Jerusalem, but he had Guy swear that, while Baldwin lived, he would not make himself king or alienate parts of the royal domain. Fearing discontent among his barons, Baldwin had failed to give Guy any experience in military leadership prior to making him regent. Indeed, the great lords of the kingdom, the independent rulers of Antioch and Tripoli, and the Grand Masters of the military orders refused to cooperate with Guy. Baldwin recovered unexpectedly and returned to Jerusalem. Having found that coastal climate suited his health, Baldwin offered Jerusalem to Guy in exchange for Tyre. Guy brusquely refused, possibly because Tyre was more lucrative, leaving Baldwin gravely insulted. The wedding of Baldwin's half-sister, Isabella, and Humphrey IV of Tehran was celebrated in Karak in late 1183. Saladin attacked during the festivities and laid siege to the castle. The retired king had gathered a council in Jerusalem to inform him about the government of the kingdom when news about the siege reached him. He immediately dismissed Guy from regency and resumed power, as the defense of such a vital fortress and the king's half-sister within it could not be entrusted to the man who had proven unable to command the troops. Guy's removal from regency was effectively disinheritance. At the council's insistence, deliberations about the succession followed. The proposal of the king's mother that Sibylla's 5-year-old son, Baldwin, be made co-king was accepted, and the boy was crowned on the 20th of November. In late November, Baldwin ordered the lighting of a beacon on the Tower of David, which may have been the first in a chain of such beacons, in order to hearten the defenders of the intensely bombarded Karak. Baldwin accompanied his troops again, but having become blind and immobile, this time he went in a litter slung between two horses. His presence was essential to unite the discordant barons. Even his humiliated brother-in-law led his men. Warned by his scouts about the king's approach and concerned about having left Egypt unguarded, Saladin abandoned the siege on the 4th of December. Baldwin entered Karak triumphantly. The question of regency for his nephew troubled Baldwin. The only way to ensure that Guy could not claim it was to have his marriage to Sibylla annulled. Baldwin discussed this with the patriarch, Heraclius. The king may have intended to claim that he had forced his sister to marry Guy and that the marriage was unlawful because of that. Sibylla's unwavering loyalty to Guy thwarted his plans, as the couple refused to appear at court. Early in 1184, Baldwin ordered Guy to attend him as vassal in Jerusalem. Guy declined, citing poor health, and this was repeated several times. Baldwin then had himself carried to Ascalon in the company of the High Court. Guy refused to let him into the city. From the battlements and towers, the inhabitants witnessed the king ceremoniously raise his hand to knock on the gates and demand admission only for the gates to remain closed. The king was welcomed in Jaffa, however, where he installed a governor, thereby depriving Guy of half of his county. In Acre, Baldwin summoned his council, probably to gain support to seize Guy's fief on the grounds of refusal of the royal summons. The Patriarch and the Grand Masters begged Baldwin to forgive Guy in order to avoid a civil war. This was as unacceptable to Baldwin as it would have been to any contemporary king. The Patriarch and the Grand Masters stormed out of the council, swaying the rest of the assembly to withhold support for the action. Baldwin was reconciled with the Patriarch and the Grand Masters by June when he sent them to Europe on a diplomatic mission to seek aid for the kingdom. He informed them by letter that Saladin was once more besieging Karak. Again, Saladin abandoned the siege when the litter-bound king approached with his army. Once in Karak, Baldwin ordered and financed the reparations of the damaged castle. In late 1184, Baldwin was shocked to learn about Guy's massacre of the Bedouin of the royal fief of Darum, who were under royal protection and who provided information about the Egyptians' movements. He soon developed a fever. When he returned to Jerusalem in late 1184 or early 1185, Baldwin bestowed regency on Raymond of Tripoli, the man whom he had never trusted, but to whom he could find no better alternative. At the time, he expected to survive the illness, having done so twice before, but within weeks it became apparent that it would be his last. On his deathbed he summoned the High Court to appoint a permanent regent for his nephew, Baldwin V, and Raymond was chosen. The dying king then ordered that homage be rendered to his nephew as king and to Raymond as regent, to be followed by a solemn crown-wearing ceremony at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Baldwin IV died, attended by his vassals, in March 1185 or before the 16th of May 1185 at the latest, when Baldwin V is recorded as the sole king. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, close to his father, King Amalric. The young Baldwin V died the next year. Sibylla, who succeeded her son, made Guy king. Baldwin IV's realm was destroyed by Saladin following his decisive victory over Guy at the Horns of Hattin in 1187. Sibylla and her daughters died in 1190, leaving Isabella I as the heir to the defeated kingdom. Christian defeat at Hattin 2 years after Baldwin's death marred the king's legacy, with historians tracing fatal discord to Baldwin's reign. Yet, while Baldwin was on the throne, the kingdom lost no territory and flourished economically and spiritually. Baldwin understood the importance of curbing Saladin's power, which was reflected in his choice of ministers. He did not devise strategy or diplomacy alone, and delegated church patronage and finances to his mother, Agnes, and uncle, Jocelyn, respectively. His chief contribution was his determination not to abdicate before finding a suitable successor, despite leprosy making government an unbearable burden. As was clear during his reign and especially in its disastrous aftermath, Baldwin alone preserved unity in the kingdom. Baldwin's public image may have been aided by his chastity, seen as evidence of extraordinary sanctity, and his success against Saladin was interpreted as a sign of God's favor. After the disastrous Seventh Crusade, a crusader was told by an old man in Damascus, "I have seen a time when King Baldwin of Jerusalem, the one who was a leper, beat Saladin although he only had 300 armed men against Saladin's 3,000. But now your sins have come to such a pass that we round you up in the fields like cattle." Despite perceived sanctity, Baldwin was not particularly devout. He was primarily a knight, both in character and in upbringing, and to contemporaries his most distinctive traits were his courage and honorableness. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful and inspiring. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what topics you'd like to see next. Until then, keep striving for success, and see you in the next video.